House Democrats now poised to issue a blunt ultimatum to Vice President Pence tomorrow, invoke the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump by Wednesday, or they'll make the president the first ever to be impeached twice.
I think every day he's in office, he remains a real and present danger to the country.
So there's this moment in Congress where a representative from Maryland steps up and asks to move along with a resolution. It's House Resolution 21, which basically tells Vice President Michael R. Pence to step in and take charge. Now, when you have senators pushing for a president to be removed from office, not through the usual election process or waiting for a term to end, but right away it raises some eyebrows. Senator Ed Markey is, for instance, calling on Trump's cabinet to pull the trigger on the 25th Amendment. It's all adding up. Multiple Democrats are saying Trump is mentally unfit to lead and really appears to be spiraling.
We need to invoke the 25th Amendment because that is lunacy. We cannot sleepwalk into World War III. As Dr. King said, the time is always right to do what is right. And right now, that means we have to fight.
Even some Republicans are breaking ranks with him over issues like Venezuela war powers and whatnot. There are reports of Trump having heated, profanity-laden conversations with GOP senators who are challenging him. It's honestly hard to believe he said that out loud. What's really striking here is that this kind of talk is unusual for a second-term president. Trump has weathered 2 impeachments thanks to support from his party, but now you've got members of his own party looking at constitutional alternatives. The idea here is to use the tools in the Constitution meant to handle a dangerous president. And it's not happening quietly. They're speaking out, calling for his removal, blocking his agenda, and defying his orders. The possibility looms that Trump could be out before the elections in 2026, not just by impeachment, but through a mix of pressure from the 25th Amendment, a potential cabinet revolt, a Senate rebellion, and his growing isolation within politics. Why does this matter? Well, senators don't take calls for presidential removal lightly. The 25th Amendment is meant for leaders who can't perform their duties or pose a danger to the country. Markey is basically stating that Trump fits that bill right now, especially with his fixation on Greenland or his text to Norway's prime minister, where he basically said he wouldn't focus on peace anymore since he didn't get a Nobel Peace Prize. It just shows how personal grievances are shaping his foreign policy and military decisions.
Trump wants to fight for an ice-covered Greenland, but we need to fight against ice-covered communities in America. Dr. King won the Nobel Prize for being a paragon of peace. Donald Trump wants to declare war on Greenland because Norway hurt his feelings by not giving him a Nobel Peace Prize.
So here's the deal. Senator Markey is really concerned, calling this a sign of mental illness and unfitness. He believes it's dangerous, and he's urging the cabinet to use the 25th Amendment to remove Trump before anything catastrophic happens. Senator Markey isn't alone in this. He's got support from several House Democrats, including Representatives Yasamin Ansari and Sidney Camel. They're all echoing calls for Trump's removal and labeling him as mentally unfit and out of control. This isn't just exaggeration. These lawmakers are genuinely worried, saying it's time to take action because this president is a danger.
The President of the United States is calling for the execution of elected officials. This is an outright threat, and it's deadly serious. We have already seen what happens when Donald Trump tells his followers that his political opponents are enemies of the state. Every time Donald Trump posts things like this, he makes political violence more likely.
They believe there's a constitutional way to remove presidents who pose a threat, and it's time to use it. The whole Greenland situation really highlights their concerns. Trump has developed an obsession with Greenland, pushing for U.S. control despite Denmark's firm no in international law, saying it's not going to happen. He just won't let it go. And after being denied a Nobel Peace Prize, he texted Norway's prime minister, claiming that because of that snub, he's no longer committed to pursuing peace efforts in Greenland.
The president sent a letter to Norway's prime minister, according to a diplomat who's seen the note. He wrote in part, quote, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America."
It's like he's saying, I didn't get my award, so now I'll force the issue if I have to. It's pretty crazy to think that he would prioritize his personal grievances over national interests. Senators are pointing out that this proves he's unfit for office, raising concerns about him having control over nuclear codes and military decisions. They're urging the cabinet to take action before he does something reckless, like starting a conflict over Greenland just because he feels slighted about that Nobel Prize. It's honestly hard to believe that Republicans are starting to distance themselves from Trump. And it's not about the 25th Amendment this time. It's about his war powers regarding Venezuela. Initially, 5 Senate Republicans sided with Democrats to pass a resolution that aimed to limit Trump's military authority, basically ensuring he didn't make any military moves without checking in with Congress first. This is pretty unusual since Republicans typically don't go against Trump when it comes to foreign policy or team up with Democrats to restrict presidential power. But the situation in Venezuela is so clearly unauthorized that even some Republicans couldn't back it up. They initially voted with the Democrats, which is a big deal. Then Trump absolutely lost it. He had a call with Senator Susan Collins that was filled with profanity, berating her for daring to stand up to him. He also put heavy pressure on his fellow Republicans, threatening them and demanding their loyalty. Most ended up caving and changing their votes, leading to the resolution's failure. But the fact that 5 Republicans broke ranks is telling. It shows there's a crack in their loyalty and that some see Trump as a bit too dangerous and are willing to push back, at least until the pressure gets too high. And then there's the Senate's moves to threaten Trump's funding. 7 Senate Republicans teamed up with Democrats to knock down an initial spending package, forcing Trump to swallow a deal that excluded funding for Homeland Security. This was a response to the uncomfortable feeling senators from both parties have regarding ICE operations, especially after the recent killings in Minneapolis and violations of court orders. They used funding as leverage, saying they won't provide money until there are reforms, courts are respected in the killing of American stops. That's some serious pressure because without this funding, things could get tough for Trump. With that Senate joint resolution passing at 51-47, Trump's immigration agenda is stalling, and operations at DHS are being constrained. He's also facing pushback on his tariff threats against NATO allies over Greenland demands. Senators are rolling their eyes at that move, calling it insane and harmful to alliances, saying it's only helping Russia and China. So now Trump finds himself facing challenges from multiple directions. Calls for the 25th Amendment, restrictions on war powers, funding limitations, and opposition to tariffs. They're blocking funding and support, making it tough for him to push his agenda forward. It's almost like his own party is turning against him, and that's causing quite a stir. You've got folks like Markey mentioning the 25th Amendment due to some of Trump's outbursts, and multiple Democrats are expressing concerns about his mental fitness. Meanwhile, Republicans are breaking ranks over the situation in Venezuela. And the Senate is disagreeing on a bunch of issues like DHS funding and those Greenland tariffs. Trump, in turn, is responding with rants filled with profanity and making threats behind closed doors. It's clear he's furious that his own party is standing up to him. And that fury just proves that senators might be onto something. They see him as out of control and potentially dangerous. Now, even though the idea of removing him through the 25th Amendment might not go anywhere, the fact that it's being mentioned is significant. It speaks volumes about Trump's fitness to govern and his overall legitimacy. So let's break down what the 25th Amendment really entails. Section 4 allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare the president unable to perform his duties. If they choose to do this, the vice president steps in as acting president. The president could contest this decision, but then it would require a 2/3 vote from both houses of Congress to keep him out, which is quite a tall order. In reality, it seems unlikely anyone will invoke this against Trump, J.D. Vance isn't going to do it, and the cabinet isn't on board either. Even if they were, getting 2/3 of Congress to agree would be nearly impossible. So why does Markey's call even matter? It's all about the political implications. It's a statement that suggests this president is so unfit, so potentially dangerous that methods for constitutional removal should be considered. Even though nothing might come from it, just the fact that it's been said creates a negative image for Trump. It paints him as weak or unstable, which can be politically damaging. It makes governing tougher for him and raises concerns among allies while empowering opponents. You know, it's becoming pretty clear that Trump is losing touch with reality. Take his obsession with Greenland. It's honestly hard to believe he's still fixated on it. Ever since his first term, he's wanted to buy it, and he's been pretty vocal about it. But in his second term, things just escalated. He made it a priority, demanded that NATO allies support U.S. control, and even threatened tariffs on countries that wouldn't play along. It's all incredibly unrealistic considering Denmark won't sell, and the international community isn't backing him at all. Acquiring Greenland physically is just a dream at this point, but he just can't let it go. And here's the kicker. It seems he thinks snagging Greenland might finally earn him a Nobel Peace Prize. When he was denied the prize, he sent a text to Norway's prime minister saying he's no longer committed to a peaceful approach and hinted that he might resort to force. Now that's quite deranged, isn't it? His foreign policy is turning into a quest for personal recognition driven by his ego and some pettiness about not getting an award. It's not about national interest or strategic importance. It's all about wanting that prize, even if it means stirring up conflict to get it. Senators are looking at this and thinking it's downright dangerous. Here's a president who might actually consider invading Greenland just to grab a Nobel Prize or start a war with a NATO ally over a personal issue. This is the kind of situation that brings to mind the 25th Amendment, making decisions based on ego rather than sound reasoning, on personal feelings instead of national interest. That's true danger, and that's what Markey is pointing out when he's calling for removal. Switching gears, let's talk about some breaking news regarding Republican stances on war powers in Venezuela. Normally, Republicans are all about supporting presidential war powers and deferring to the executive on foreign policy. But this operation in Venezuela is so clearly illegal, just blatantly beyond Trump's authority, that even some Republicans are stepping back. Initially, 5 of them broke ranks and joined Democrats on a resolution aiming to limit Trump's military power, demanding congressional authorization for any continued operations. It's a clear message showing that even they think he's crossed a line, declaring it illegal and that they can't support it. But Trump's reaction, total rage. He had a profanity-laden call with Susan Collins, threw around threats at others, and started a massive pressure campaign. Most Republicans ended up caving, changing their votes to support Trump because they're more afraid of him than committed to their own principles. They're more worried about facing primary challenges than upholding constitutional values. So let's dive into what's been happening. It seems Trump is really losing his grip, especially with a recent resolution that failed. It was interesting to see 5 Republicans break away, showing there's a crack in their loyalty. It definitely highlights that some members are willing to stand up to him when pushed too far. Now, the real action is happening with the fight over Department of Homeland Security funding. The Senate has this powerful tool with their control over appropriations, and they're putting it to use. 7 Republicans teamed up with Democrats to block the initial spending package that included DHS funding. This forced Trump to accept a deal that separated out Homeland Security funding, delaying it and giving the senators some leverage. They're demanding reforms, accountability for what's happening in Minneapolis, and respect for court orders to end systematic violations. This leverage is significant since DHS needs funding and ICE can't operate without it. If the Senate holds back those appropriations, it severely hampers Trump's immigration agenda, making him negotiate and concede on issues he'd prefer to avoid. Then we have the tariff situation where Trump is threatening tariffs against NATO allies and others who won't back his claims on Greenland. Senators are outright rejecting that idea, pointing out that it would hurt alliances and benefit adversaries. With the Senate not backing him, Trump's trade power is really limited. He can't just slap on tariffs without facing backlash. And that's a good thing in terms of curbing some of his more reckless tendencies. And speaking of reckless, Trump's recent rants filled with profanity really show how he's losing control. When Senator Susan Collins disagreed with him over Venezuela, he unleashed an emotional fit, berating her. That reaction certainly doesn't come off as presidential or indicative of effective leadership, more like a man losing his grip and struggling to handle opposition calmly. Senators are noticing this behavior and maybe starting to wonder if he's too unstable and if maybe they should think about constraints or even removal. Lastly, Trump's comment about impeachment, if Republicans don't win in 2026, is eye-opening. It's clear he knows he's vulnerable and recognizes that if Democrats gain power, he could really be in trouble. So Trump is feeling the heat lately, and honestly, it's hard to believe how panicked he's become. He's out there demanding loyalty from Republicans because he knows that without their support, he's pretty much exposed and in a vulnerable position. And let's face it, there's enough evidence piling up against him that could lead to impeachment. Senators are actually stepping up and pushing for his removal, using everything on their list, from the Greenland obsession to the situations in Minneapolis and Venezuela, and even legal challenges he's faced. While it's true that the 25th Amendment might not go through, the calls for it are still causing political harm to Trump. They paint him as unfit, unstable, and dangerous, which definitely adds to his woes. Now, we're seeing some cracks among Republicans on key issues like war powers, funding, and tariffs. It's not enough to kick Trump out just yet, but it does show that some members are starting to recognize the issues and are willing to stand up against him, at least until the pressure really starts to mount. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of why these calls for the 25th Amendment are important. Even if they don't lead anywhere, they start to shape a narrative that suggests Trump isn't mentally fit for the job, that his decisions are driven more by ego than by sound judgment. This narrative is powerful. It sways how the public, especially moderates and independents, sees him. When senators who have first-hand experience with him express their concerns, it makes folks wonder if they might be onto something. This shift in perception erodes his support and creates unease among his allies while giving his opponents the confidence to push back harder. Then there's the situation with the Nobel Prize. Remember when Trump texted Norway's prime minister about how he felt snubbed for not getting it? That's pretty telling. It shows that for him, foreign policy seems to be all about personal recognition and awards rather than what's best for the country or strategic decision-making. When senators highlight this, they have a valid point that it shows a lack of fitness for the job, making military choices based on personal grievances. Now, that's a serious issue. It's pretty eye-opening to think about how Trump's actions are triggering some serious concerns about whether he should be removed from office. This is where Markey's call for the 25th Amendment really hits hard, especially considering the wild examples he brings up. It's crazy to see a few Republicans break ranks over the situation in Venezuela. While these aren't permanent departures and they eventually fell back in line after some pressure, the fact that 5 of them initially dissented is a big deal. It shows that even within the Republican Party, there are limits to how far they'll go in supporting Trump, especially on issues as extreme as Venezuela, which clearly crosses the line into illegal war territory and goes beyond presidential authority. That little crack in the facade sets a precedent. It proves that future splits could happen if Trump pushes things far enough, making him think twice about his policies and how they could spark rebellion among his party. Then there's the Senate's control over funding, which is putting real checks on Trump. The whole tussle over the Department of Homeland Security funding showcases just how much power the Senate has, allowing them to block his agenda and push for necessary reforms. They can make him negotiate and concede because he needs that funding and operational capacity, and the Senate holds the reins on that. So even with his executive power, he can't just run roughshod over everything. He has to play ball. Now let's talk about Trump's rants filled with profanity. They reveal a lot about his mental state. It's pretty rare for presidents to lose their cool like that, screaming and cursing at senators instead of maintaining their composure and rallying support. Watching him rage like that indicates a loss of control, and it shows he's not handling opposition in a mature way, which raises red flags for the senators. They start to see him as the one with nuclear codes making life and death decisions. And it leads them to wonder if he might really be too unstable or dangerous. Maybe the constitutional tools meant for his removal or to rein him in aren't just an overreaction. They could actually be necessary responses to a genuine threat. Looking ahead, there's the looming worry about impeachment in 2026. Trump isn't naive. He knows the numbers. If the Democrats take the House, they'll have the votes to impeach him. And this time around, the evidence could be much stronger than in his previous impeachments. The recent events like the Minneapolis killings only add fuel to that fire. It's fascinating to see how the situation unfolds with Trump. He's facing serious issues with scandals involving things like the Venezuela war, the Epstein cover-up, and his refusal to comply with court rulings, all solid grounds for high crimes and misdemeanors. Deep down, Trump knows that the Senate is unlikely to convict him. However, the impeachment process itself is causing significant damage. It takes over the news, paints him in a corrupt light, and creates a scandal that could lead to enough public outrage and a handful of Republicans crossing party lines. That looming possibility absolutely terrifies him. It's clear now why he's pushing for unwavering loyalty and issuing warnings, because he recognizes that 2026 could be the year everything falls apart for him. It brings us to another point, the implications for his remaining time in office. When senators are already calling for his removal and are splitting on essential votes or blocking funding projects, it's a major sign that Trump's power is limited. He's unable to pursue his agenda effectively since the Senate isn't playing ball as they should, demanding compromises and preventing his more extreme moves. This translates to a less productive presidency in these last 2 years and might even affect the Republicans in the 2028 elections as they become weary of the chaos he brings. So where does that leave us? Where does senators are currently pushing for his removal via constitutional means like the 25th Amendment and impeachment based on various controversies, ranging from the Greenland madness to the killings in Minneapolis, the Venezuela conflict, and his court defiance. Even if immediate removal isn't on the table, these demands are crucial. They're creating a narrative of unfitness, causing political damage, stirring the opposition, and revealing the fractures in Republican support. Republicans are starting to fracture over issues like war powers and funding, though not decisively enough to kick Trump out. Still, every crack in unity limits his power and complicates governance. In response, Trump is showing explosive anger, cursing, and making threats, which only reinforces the senator's claims that he's unstable and unfit for office. This brings me to my final thought. The erosion of presidential power isn't dramatic. It happens gradually through mounting opposition. Senators calling for the 25th Amendment, Republicans splitting on key votes and imposing funding restrictions. Every institutional check takes a toll, leading to a slow and steady weakening of power. Trump might not be outright removed, but he is definitely constrained and made less effective, and this weakness is bound to catch up with him. It looks like Trump's presidency might be heading toward a slow decline rather than a flashy exit. More and more signs are popping up that his grip on power is loosening. I've noticed some Republicans already starting to distance themselves, like 5 who broke ranks over Venezuela and 7 who aren't on board with funding. The calls for the 25th Amendment are getting louder, showing that his party is starting to see him as more of a liability than an asset. Instead of facing a dramatic ousting, he might just fade into obscurity, continuing to shout and threaten, but without the ability to push his agenda or command loyalty. He could very well just be hanging on until his term wraps up or until Democrats take control in 2026 and go for impeachment. For someone like Trump, who craves absolute loyalty and power, this gradual decline could be worse than a quick removal. It's a slow humiliation, almost like public proof that even members of his own party view him as a danger and an embarrassment. When it comes to his future, I honestly think he might survive. I doubt his cabinet would invoke the 25th Amendment, and people like Vance won't turn on him. Even if Democrats push for impeachment, I don't see Republicans convicting him. But just because he survives doesn't mean he's effective or powerful. He could remain president, but as a weakened figure struggling to put his plans into action while facing nonstop opposition. In the long run, he might either lose to the Democrats in 2026 and face impeachment or finish his term, having achieved little, ultimately damaging his party's future and proving the senator's right about his unfitness for the role. That kind of legacy isn't the mark of a successful presidency. It's more about chaos, incompetence, and an inevitable political defeat.